We welcome you to She Leads the Way, a podcast series by Voluntary Action Network India. Hello, listeners. Welcome to our podcast, She Leads the Way, where we have the privilege of talking to women leaders from the sector and know more about their journeys. We have with us today another leader from the Indian civil society who has been at the forefront of the fight for gender equality in the political economy and development paradigm. Through her tireless efforts and unwavering commitment, she is trying to reshape the landscape of equitable and sustainable development models, ensuring that protection and promotion of gender equality and human rights are at the core of these transformative initiatives. Please welcome Ms. Priti Darooka, founder and executive director of the Program on Women's Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, PWESCR, an international advocacy organization based in India, Sri Lanka, and in Netherlands, and she is also a founding member of the BRICS Feminist Wall. Namaste, Preeti ji. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Namaste, a pleasure to be here. A real honor. Thank you so much for having me with you, Pallavi.
Thank you so much. So, Preeti ji, please tell us, can you share with us the driving force behind your passion for advocating gender equality?
So I can't say that one fine day I woke up and I became a feminist. So I became, I remember right from very early age, everything bothered me. I had to voice, and my family perhaps thought of me as a problem child because I had to, speak up and couldn't be quiet. And I would say that many years later, when I was doing my master's in women's studies, this was in at Rutgers in New Jersey in US. I met a fellow feminist, and that's when I realized that the problem is not with me. The problem is out, and there are others who think like me. And so
Right.
I always say feminism saved me. Otherwise, I was a rebel without a cause. And I just felt that I was getting everything was making me so upset and angry
Mhm.
till I found my comrades. And so, how you channel things which upset you into a productive way has been a long learning journey. And I've had some very good mentors and support in doing that to be more effective.
Right. So you basically found your purpose. So, Preeti ji, can you tell us that how do you envision a future where gender equality and human rights are central to equitable and sustainable development models? And what steps do you believe are necessary to achieve this vision?
I think there's no one magic bullet. I
Hmm.
also feel that over the years, there's such amazing work that has happened. And I totally, very strongly believe that we are standing on shoulders of our past leaders, both
Hmm.
in the women's movement and human rights or larger social justice movement. And my life is definitely different than my mother's, and her life was perhaps different than her mother or my grandmother. And
Hmm.
so, of course, change has happened, but change is a slow process. And
Right.
so, as we continue to build alliances, coalition, put our heads together, uh, simultaneously, it's not a linear journey. Sometimes you feel you've taken two steps forward, and then there is a backlash, and it seems
Hmm.
that you have taken three steps backward.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's important that we stay committed and move on it. I see pockets of opportunity around. It's not just discourses around decolonialism and decolonial feminism. I feel they are gaining a lot more. Like when I was a student in women's studies, I
Hmm.
was, of course, a woman of color in predominantly a white
Hmm.
university in the
Hmm.
US, and was very
Yeah.
aware of my South or colored identity.
Hmm.
Now, if you look at, like, just to give you a more concrete example, with all the critical analysis, as well as, you know, us all following the G20 and
Hmm.
India's presidency,
Right.
of course, India wants to change the narrative and has made women led development one of the overarching themes. Um, uh, how it actually pans out after the G20 is yet to be
Hmm.
seen.
Hmm.
Uh, but just putting that in a G20 theme in such a has allowed such elaborate conversations from a South perspective to happen, to really provide much needed building blocks for a not just tweaking what existed, but a
Hmm.
major paradigm shift in our work towards women's empowerment, gender equality in general. So it's too early, of course, let's see where this goes,
Right.
whether that can provide a promising framework,
Hmm.
which is rooted in a South reality and analysis, which will be good.
Right. So, like you said, Preeti ji, that it is a slow process. Achieving gender equality is a slow process. So, have there been days when you felt, maybe this is like really depressing, or things are not working out, or have you felt let down or something like that?
Um, yeah, many times, because see, unlike, I think, perhaps more younger uh, generations, when I see, um, you all come with professional degrees in this field, whereas we
Hmm.
came with our politics and passion. The NGO space or these social justice spaces provided us, and we were not there because we wanted to make a living, but the living part just happened. But now we've become so comfortable with the NGO way of working that these uh, we know, but in not just in India, in many countries, these spaces are being challenged if they are funded by foreign outfits, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I qualify that because I feel like, again, you look at G20, there was enough civil society engagement, but it wasn't the civil society that we usually see.
Right.
Uh, right? Like, so we can't say that the civil society space has been shut off.
Hmm.
Others also, but it is a particular kind of civil society space which were curtail, right? So these
Hmm.
are, of course, it feels like a backlash, but then backlash also uh, teaches you many things. Like, you look at, as I'm sharing the G20 women led development, and
Hmm.
as the India presidency goes on,
Hmm.
we had two horrific incidences in India. One was the women wrestlers. Like, it is so shameful. Why did they
It
have to
is.
sit for so long? Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is this, right? Like, it's what kind of women-led development are we talking about then, right? Like, you can't even forget who's right or wrong. At least let the due process happen.
Agreed.
Uh, but you can't even let the due process happen. Then what? And then the
Hmm.
whole Manipur
Yeah. Yeah.
incidents, right? Like,
That's really sad.
horrific. So these are, of course, that makes you feel where are we going and what are we doing.
So, Preeti ji, as a leader in this field, in the civil society, what are the challenges that you faced through your journey, and how have you overcome them?
So of course, I'll tell you a little bit. I don't know, Pallavi, if you know my personal journey. I'll tell you a little bit.
Hmm.
And my journey started in the US. I lived in US and worked there for 15 years.
Hmm.
And I was at the in the belly of the beast, as you may say. And I was working in international spaces, mainly around UN, working
Hmm.
for international organizations. Briefly, I worked for the UN also, and Ford Foundation, etc. Now,
Hmm.
being in these spaces, I was very aware. I became very aware of the North South politics. How
Okay.
the North, and I'm talking 20, 25 years ago, how North
Hmm.
dominates these spaces.
Yeah.
The South can be participating, but the North are the gatekeepers. They will set the
Mm,
agenda.
mm,
And South came in as case studies or providing evidence.
okay.
The analysis and knowledge was very much controlled by the North.
Okay.
And it continues
Mm,
even like and when we look at, so therefore after being there for long time, 15 years, I
mm,
made a very conscious decision to move. I said, I'm going to work in the South. I want to build the
mm,
South.
mm,
And I moved back. I moved to India and started Pusar with the whole idea that we will build women's leadership capacity to engage in global spaces from a South feminist perspective.
right.
Uh, the challenges were many. Like
Mm,
I being as an organization being based in India doing global work, we would be seen as an Indian organization or at best a regional organization. We would
mm,
not be recognized as a global or international organization.
right. Right.
Funding politics also.
Mm,
So we would never have access to global funding.
mm,
If it was a donor, we would only have access to Asia desk or India desk representative. And we will say, but we do global work.
right.
We might have like Pusar has network in 40, 45 countries.
Mm,
Uh, and there might be an organization which is based in say Netherlands or Europe. They
mm,
might be working, they may never have visited left Netherlands, but they might
okay.
have done some kind of desk review or something in one country, two country. They will be recognized as international organization and we won't.
Wow. Mm,
Right. So funding politics is, I would be invited, for example, I'm sure
mm,
many other uh, leaders in the South go through this, to
mm,
speak on, like, say, okay, can you speak on India, this thing? And I would say, I'm not an
mm,
Indian expert. If you want India expert, I'll suggest some names. But if you want me
mm,
to speak on global South women issue or international women's issue, I can give you that. But I'm not a country expert.
right.
Uh, Also, the kind of funding comes.
Mm,
So we can get a lot of money to do training, capacity building, or gathering evidence to provide to
okay.
North NGOs to
Mm,
make these flashy reports and present wherever
mm,
and hold our government, whatever, accountable or whatever.
yeah.
However, for us to do research and advocacy and get funding for that, very difficult. You cannot do and cross country, cross regional. No, you can't be based in the South and do that.
Mm,
Uh, when I was working in New York, I was never asked, how are you working with Black community? How are you working with Latino community? How are you working with, but if we are based in the South, how are you working with Dalits? How are you
mm,
working with tribals? How are you working, all these are all politics of it.
right. Right.
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't, but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Understood.
it's
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
to be right. Like, so it's the whole intersection both of South as well as women,
Mm,
and uh, so we have been very mindful. The other thing what happens is, see, our issues are very real
yeah.
in the in our countries. Like
Mm,
poverty is in our face, discrimination is in our face. Like, it's not
yes.
something. Uh, uh,
It's not hidden.
it's not hidden, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's overwhelming. Like we can be totally consumed. Like based in India, we can be totally consumed by India-based issues. Right.
Mm,
And that's also a reality. A lot of South-based, like when 25 years ago, when Pusar we started working in these spaces, how many international organizations you have which have head offices in Global South?
mm,
There might be international organizations which country offices or regional offices in
right.
Global South, but not head offices. So we
Mm,
started critiquing, and then Action Aid moved to the South, then Oxfam moved to the South, but yet it comes from the same colonial mindset of West. And so we were very
Mm,
mindful that we are going to change, or, our head office is in Delhi, and then
mm,
we opened in office in Netherlands. And
mm, mm. So, Preeti ji, you've worked in India and outside India both. So, have you ever seen, or have you noticed a difference in the representation of women at decision-making levels?
we have to fight to be at the tables.
Mm,
Uh, we are allowed to be at the tables if we are willing to present our case study, problems, or evidence.
right.
But at the table, as providing analysis and being part of the decision making is
Mm,
a challenge. So we
right.
find this, we've worked this like also globally, it's the north south within the women's spaces.
Mm,
We find that, and within, say, at country level, we might find that with our comrades, the male comrades, in terms of convincing. So, what we see, which has emerged, is
mm,
women and feminists are seen as interchangeable. You may have a woman speaker, which is great, you should.
mm.
But that
Yeah,
doesn't mean that the expert is bringing in necessarily a feminist analysis to the issue. And I always say gender is a technical issue. You need experts, like, it's not rocket science, but
yeah,
you need people, and feminist analysis. Are you bringing just women as token, or are you really bringing a feminist analysis to the
right,
discourse, right?
right,
So those
right.
are challenges.
Mm,
Uh, I, of course, if I may say this, but I don't know the other G20 processes, but I know the G20 summit has documented very well the videos from various panels, and it was really good to see women
mm,
speakers and speaking on gender issues across. It's high time that became a norm, no? How long? Like,
right.
sometimes I feel like, if you don't get gender equality, I'm sorry, you are obsolete, and I don't have any more energy to teach you, train
You
you.
understand.
Like,
Yeah.
right? Like, how long are we going to just get stuck and fight that only? Like, don't we have to move
Mm,
forward and do other things?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. So, Preeti ji, in your experience, what are some of the key barriers and systemic challenges, that prevent gender equality from being fully integrated into, say, development policies and initiatives?
I think it's there is number one, lack of awareness, lack of political will. Uh, it also uh, uh, it also how our women leaders have capacity to engage in these spaces, how we are able to not just highlight the gaps and the problem, but are able to give very concrete policy recommendation.
Mm,
uh, One thing I find that we are very good in elaborating what the problem is, and then I will
mm.
ask people, okay, so what do you want? Tell me, like, what is the and how
A
do we put
solution.
it in how do we put it in a policy? Tell me, like,
Mm,
amazing, amazing work already is happening. Uh, you know, at all levels, like whether you look at rural level, women's organizing, women's leadership, there are so many fabulous examples. Like,
mm.
I was looking at, for example, um, examples of women-led development in India. Pallavi,
Okay.
I came across
Mm,
the Art of Living Foundation. They have a river rejuvenation program, and they have worked with government, private sector, but most importantly, local communities in, I think, 5 or 6 states of India, and rejuvenated over 50 rivers
okay.
in the last 8-10 years. And
Mm,
I was doing research to see if there are other NGOs,
mm.
but I couldn't find, at least not online research. Now, there is a Nag Nadi is a river tributary. I'm not sure if it is Kaveri's tributary or it is in Tamil Nadu. Nag Nadi had totally dried up. There was no water, and agriculture was in distress. In rejuvenation process happened by women in the communities. They took it on with government and Art of Living support. They having the knowledge of a local ecosystem. It's not just that desilting and blah 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 blah. It's the entire ecosystem, how the deforestation has impacted, how the crop culture has impacted the water flow, how
Hmm.
and the women's knowledge resulted in building, of course, desilting and building strategic. Uh, they call it band. It's not dam, but
Right.
it's band,
Fun.
right?
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
river based, those to slow the flow of water, that the water doesn't flow out to the ocean
Hmm.
immediately, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the river over the couple of years now has, I don't know how many meters of water has come. The groundwater level has risen by huge level.
Hmm.
Agriculture is flourishing.
Hmm.
And this was all done under the money came through NREGA,
Okay.
but it was women-led development.
Yeah.
Women were recognized as holders of knowledge. Like you usually feel, oh, they are passive victims and they just what
Hmm.
do they? But they knew how to take care of the river.
Yeah.
They knew the entire landscape ecosystem, what was required to get the river back on.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I attended last year a conference on farmers conference, and
Hmm.
there were farmers from all over India.
Hmm.
This was in Bangalore, and I met a group of about 20, 30 women farmers from Maharashtra who
Hmm.
had also rejuvenated the river in their villages. And I was sitting and talking to them, and I said, "Oh, how many of you have come?" They said, "We are 50, but 25 of us or 30 of us are women, and then rest are men. We have come from Maharashtra." So I
Hmm.
said, "Really great." And I said, like, why have you come and what? How have you come? What?
Hmm.
So they said, for
Hmm.
the first time we came by plane. I said, "Who paid for
Wow.
it?" They said,
Hmm.
"We paid for it.
Oh, wow.
We paid for our ticket." And I
Hmm.
said, "How did this happen?" They said, "We took care of the river in our village.
Hmm.
Agriculture is back on,
Hmm.
and we are like, no longer in poverty. We can buy a flight ticket. We don't need any charity."
Hmm.
It was so amazing. It was just
Yeah.
like, so that's what I'm saying. So these are such but these stories in the global south, I hope through platforms like G20 are getting amplified
Hmm.
to understand that women are not just victims, but they are actually. And if this whole women-led development actually recognizes and their knowledge, their skill as leaders of development.
So, speaking of women-led development and, women from the community, how can we ensure that the voices of marginalized and vulnerable groups, especially women, are adequately represented in policymaking and, developmental processes?
I think one of the approach that we took in
Hmm.
User was like we were constantly very mindful that we don't want to behave like white women or the Western women, even if we are women. And so
Right.
we are not just like, bringing them because they are the problems and, to these global spaces, but making sure that they are the holders of knowledge and we are just the facilitators or the catalyst in providing that space.
Hmm.
So, Pallavi, I can best answer by giving you examples from my work. So, I'll tell you one
Sure.
story from Sri Lanka. When Sri
Hmm.
Lanka was reviewed by the UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, we worked with the
Hmm.
civil society there to develop
Hmm.
a collective shadow report. And then there were 10 of us as civil society representatives that attended the Geneva session and presented the work. So in that was one of the Tamil tea plantation worker, woman worker. Now, Tamil tea plantation worker from Sri Lankan perspective, the civil war had just gotten over. This is probably 2010 or 11, 12 or something that time. The civil war in Sri Lanka had just gotten over. But Tamil plantation worker is in Sri Lankan context very marginalized voice, and that too a woman worker. So we had her and we had arranged for her meeting with the committee member. We had producer had arranged for a lunch briefing with the committee member. She spoke broken English and she was very nervous to speak or say anything. And she kept telling me, "No, Didi, you speak, and I can't do this. You speak." I said, "No, they have to hear it from you. They have to hear whatever you have to say. You have to say it, and they have to hear it from you."
Right.
And so, in broken English, with tears down her eyes, with shivering body, and that quivering voice, she told whatever she came to tell the UN about her reality, her story, and whatever it is. And then the committee members heard her. This is in Geneva, right?
Right.
Then the committee member, the actual review started. The committee member started questioning Sri Lankan government on the workers' condition in plantation, particularly women workers' condition. And when the actual review happens, the procedure is such, then the civil society cannot participate, it cannot speak, we can only sit and observe. So I was sitting with all the Sri Lankan, civil society, and this woman started crying. I was like, "Why are you crying? Like, see what you told the committee, they're asking your government question based on the information you gave. So this is a good thing. Why are you crying?" And she said, "We've been struggling for years and years, and no one gives a damn. No one has even bothered to hear us. Today I came to UN and told my story, and the UN is holding my government accountable. Nothing had changed on paper or on in reality, but she felt something that and so I think for us who me coming from US, having been exposed to international spaces, I'm not intimidated by it. I know how to get information, go through the process. And if I can be a facilitator, or user can be a catalyst in opening these spaces for more women from the South to come without being intimidated by the UN, by these global spaces, then we are going to see change.
Preeti, women's participation in political and economic decision making remains low in many parts of the world, even today. So, what strategies do you think could be successful, to increase women's representation in leadership roles?
So, see, of course, the policy has to be there. Like if you look at India's panchayati, this quota system of it's 30%, right? Like, the policy came, and in the beginning, it was all like, what was it? The Sarpanch, Pati Sarpanch or something like, pseudo representation. But today, if we see, even in non-quota seats, women are like, last data I saw was 49% of panchayat seats are in India are occupied by women. So what, it has taken us 30 years to get there. But if that amendment did not happen, but there was a long process of capacity building, then people will say, "Oh, this is a woman, but she's not capable, and therefore the husband runs it." So there was a huge investment on capacity building, leadership, explaining the all of that is required in terms of bringing change, right? It's not but the law or policy was required also, right? Like, without that it could not have happened.
Of course.
So I think the political will, policy, capacity, leadership, there's a lot of support resources required. So if
Hmm.
we, for example, I hate to take credit for it, but we were just catalyst in
Hmm.
bringing women, but we were not bringing the English speaking, capital based human right leaders to UN when we were doing shadow reports. We went and we were bringing the actual, when you talk about economic, social, cultural rights, you look at landless laborers, you look at farm workers, you look at fishing community, construction workers, tea plantation, whatever.
Hmm.
We were
Hmm.
bringing representation to Geneva from there.
Right.
Uh, but uh, uh, someone needed to have that, and I know many groups do it very well.
Hmm.
Uh, and that is very much needed, right? Because these spaces are also very much occupied by people like us, English speaking,
Hmm.
capital based elite.
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
but how do we more democratize it and make it, and our role can be providing support and nurture to uh,
So, Preeti, what advice would you give to young women today who aspire to become women leaders in the Indian civil society and advocate for gender equality?
I think they're doing amazing job. I think there's so much for us to learn from them. They are just like, and it may be a generation thing when I even look, and I'm always so inspired by how well they use, say, social media technology and things, and the way they are organizing, the way they articulate, and the way the awareness about their identity and all. But I feel, uh, somewhere uh, we valued movement and collectives more, whereas I see a more trend towards more professionalism, individualism, NGO, uh, NGOification or whatever. Uh, so my only this is uh, build collectives, keep sharing, keep talking. As feminists, I think we have raised our daughters right. Our daughters
Hmm.
are now standing up and saying no to violence and saying no, and they are able to assert. But maybe our gaps are still, we are not able to raise our sons to be real men and not to, you know,
Hmm.
engage in violence or
Right.
discrimination and recognize
Right.
women.
Right. So, PDG, as we strive for a more gender equal world, what is the role of men in championing this cause? And, how can they become allies and supporters in the journey towards gender equality?
So, first thing is, which I always tell my male comrades, that when we talk about women's rights, we
Hmm.
are not talking about, we are not like, okay, maybe because I'm a third generation feminist and I'm not from the 70s, and when they started in 70s, it came across, the feminist politics in general came across as male bashing and anti men.
Yeah.
But we have come a long way. And so when we talk about women's equality, we are not necessarily talking about being anti men. I said, like, in, I don't know how to diplomatically say it. I said, I don't have time to think about. I said, I'm so preoccupied about women's rights. It's like I'm not even
Hmm.
thinking about taking, like, so why do men feel it is anti-male agenda? It's not. It's a
Hmm.
pro-women's agenda. So that is one, and it's, you cannot prosper unless and all the wheels of a car are running together, right? Like,
Right.
something will keep pulling you. So that's a big misconception. That is one
Hmm.
thing. It's also,
Hmm.
I think, we need male role models. In after 40 years of organized women's movement, if you still don't get it, 50 years of organized women's movement, you still don't get it. So I'm, it's that means I can't teach. No one can teach you. Like, it's, you are obsolete and you are talking nonsense, then it's your problem. It's not.
Yeah.
So even if sometimes people say, fake it till you make it. So even if you fake it and get token representation of women in wherever, whatever,
Hmm.
that's a
Hmm.
start. No, it starts somewhere. At least start somewhere.
Thanks, Preeti ji. I'm sure this discussion provided a well rounded perspective on a woman leader's efforts and insights into promoting gender equality, not just at a national but global level as well. So, back to you, listeners. Remember to actively listen and follow up on interesting points to delve deeper into the conversation. We will be happy to connect with you. Goodbye and have a great weekend ahead until we see you again next week.